So welcome here. Please feel free to enhance the event by using the hashtag or just tag me at Twitter. And thank you to the sponsors of this event and of course to the organizers as well. As we all are aware of, things haven't really been normal for the last couple of months and probably won't be for quite a while ahead. And therefore, we have had to do things that we, before COVID, possibly never thought about us doing as an organization or with my customers or your organizations. And one of those things were BYOD. And in my opinion, BYOD is completely different if you review the US market or possibly even the Asian market and so on, and compare that to Europe. Because as far as I'm aware, there haven't really been that BYOD movement in Europe up until now. We have had choose your own device and various different means, but very little of what Microsoft considered to be bring your own device up until now. And that's what I will be talking about. So let's start with what is really a personal device. And this is where you use your virtual hands. So how many of you have users, colleagues, that currently are working from an unmanaged device, from home or from anywhere? Please raise your virtual hands. Yeah? About a third or so. And for the ones of you that don't have that have colleagues and users that are working on their managed devices, I hope that this can open up the choices for your colleagues and for yourself and possibly save you some money while increasing user productivity and giving that accessibility to teams regardless of which device they're on. But we'll start this session by looking at what is really a personal device and what do we need to think about that's special about a personal and unmanaged device. And I'll be showing you demos from a Windows 10 machine, a Mac OS device, an iPad, as well as a Ubuntu machine. So you have all those choices, but the thing that brings them together is that not a single one of these devices are under my management. They are all bring your own device without enrolled into anything, regardless of identity solution or management solution. And please feel free to post your questions in the chat and I'll answer them after the session, either here or in the lounge. We'll then move on to why or what we need to protect against, because there are still threats and compliance considerations to take care of now. And as I will explain in a while, I work for a company that works hands-on with those threats and with those compliance challenges that we are currently having. And we are seeing such an increase in compliance violations as well as attacks towards organizations. So we need to be on our toes and really be prepared to handle that regardless of which device we are using Microsoft Teams from. And we'll then finalize with data protection. So how can we ensure that if we allow our users to consume Microsoft Teams on any device, how can we ensure that none of our data, the most valuable asset most of the organizations I work with have, gets out of our reach? My name is Simon. I work as a principal technical architect at Trusec, based in Sweden, but work with customers all across the globe. I'm an enterprise mobility MVP, but I do consider myself working across the entire Microsoft 365 spectra, but always with security, compliance, and user satisfaction top of mind. I've been working as a certified trainer for a number of years now, done courses for Pluralsight, and spoken at a variety of conferences. And to me, my primary external platform is Twitter, so please feel free to follow me or tag me there. And if you aren't on Twitter, get on Twitter. Like that should be your go-to channel for information, together with Microsoft Teams, of course. I'm also part of Knee Deep in Tech, and when we were traveling around, I always brought my friend. His name is Ping, and for some odd reason, I love penguins. But this is actually the first virtual event he has attended together with me. My daughter may have stolen him at one point. So let's continue with a personal device. What challenges does that pose and how do I see a personal device? And in practice, I don't really care about who owns that device. That can be your organization or that can be the user. What I care about is how do the user view it and how do you manage it? So in general, many of the devices I meet when I'm out working could actually be considered a personal device, even if the organization owns it. And the three main challenges I see with personal devices are first, that we can have this and that. We can have our recipes on that device. We have a mix of our data, personal data, and the organizational data that they want to consume, that they want to create or read or share. And we need to take care of both, because I don't want to be the one responsible for deleting any data that I didn't have a reason to delete. And we don't want their data, our users' data, to get into our tenant where we are responsible for them. The second challenge is that these devices may actually not be personal. They can be accessible by anyone. I've had builders in my house now for 2 weeks doing some renovation work, and I always lock my device, turn off my screens when I'm not there working. And that's the same thing when my wife's home, when my daughter is home. I don't allow them access to my device, which is a managed device with my data, my customers' data on it, potentially. But with a personal device, that may not always be the case. We may have different users using that device, and we need to consider that, and we need to ensure that that user experience isn't impacted either. And lastly, we can't always choose what device our users decide to work on. That may be an iPad, a Windows device, a Mac device, an Android device, Linux device, whatever it may be. But that may be what they have access to, especially if they don't regularly have access to or always have access to a managed device usually, but now working from home. That may be what they can afford. That may be what they can access. So we need to care about that and consider any platform. We can, of course, require some things out of it, but that should be up to us to protect rather than limit the user in choosing their device. So personal device to me is about how it's used, the mixture of data on it, or whatever it's managed or not. If it's Azure AD joined, AD joined, Intune managed, config manager managed, or managed with any kind of MDM or management tool. So that's what we are now going to protect. And we will start by protecting it against threats and ensuring that we can stay compliant with that device. So we will start off with a Windows machine. There we go. And I will show you one thing before we get going here, actually. And let me know, and Peter, please, if you see anyone writing, oh, sorry about that. If you see anyone, did I lose my sharing now? No. If you see anyone in the chat that have trouble seeing, please let me know. So this virtual machine is not managed at all. It's not in my Azure AD, it's not in my domain, it's not under Intune management or anything, and it's a local account. And this is what this particular user, Mr. Finn Nemo, has chosen to work on. And we may not always be able to protect that device from various cyber threats out there. And in this case, Finn decided that it was a good thing to download Mimikatz. And for the ones of you that don't know, Mimikatz is a quite famous hacker tool. And I have, for this demo, actually disabled Microsoft Defender, but that may actually be the case. They may not even have an anti-malware on their device. So this isn't picked up here. And this could actually be an attack path as well. So I'm perfectly fine to upload this potentially malicious file to Teams. And that worked just fine. But what happens now? what happens if anyone downloads this on their managed device or on another unmanaged device? And this is where Office 365 ATP for Teams comes in, and we'll see if this can update. Can be slow. Yep, there we go. As you may see, I've actually got a small red indicator here saying that this is actually a malicious file. And if I try to download this, it's compromised by malware. And I'm therefore protected against threats that may reside on unmanaged devices that are uploaded into Microsoft Teams. And I can from here take action, and we'll see this alert lighting up in Cloud App Security later on. So we can protect ourselves against malicious threats, malicious code, viruses, whatever it can be, even if they try to access our environment through Microsoft Teams from unmanaged devices. That was the first one. The second demo I'm going to show, and now I will connect from my MacBook. So there we go. This again, I'm going to be very honest now. This is actually a managed MacBook, but not by this account. So it's under Jamf management, but for another tenant. So in this case, we can assume that it's an unmanaged device. It won't matter at all from this point of view. And here we have my Teams client on macOS. I try to sign in here. That's me preparing the demo. And I may have messed up my conditional access rules now. Yes, I have. So my intention, and I will show that on Linux later on, I hope, were to be blocked now, since we have somewhat limited capabilities to protecting the client as such on non-Microsoft OSs, and especially I would say on Mac OS and Linux today. So my intention were to show that this would be blocked by conditional access, and that I instead would be using Microsoft Edge. And I know that Raphael were talking about Cloud App Security previously, and this is another way of using it. So for this particular machine and my particular conditional access policies, I've configured that users shouldn't be allowed to access the Teams client on unmanaged devices or on particular operating systems. The only way they can access Microsoft Teams on those devices is by using the browser. And if they do, they are passed through Cloud App Security, which allows us to set a number of different policies on their session as such. And we'll go into detail on that when we come to Linux as well. So as you can see here, you can see that my regular Teams URL have been changed to a Cloud App Security URL, and all traffic will be passing through that. And I continue to Microsoft Teams. And from here, the experience is actually, come on. The experience should be the same as with any other Teams access. This is what happens, Peter, when you prepare the demos in advance. I shouldn't have done that. But I have some backups, so we'll get going here in just a second. So what I've shown you first is that we can protect ourselves from getting malicious code from unmanaged devices where we aren't able to protect ourselves against those threats when we can't manage the device. We have also seen how we can limit the access to these services by using conditional access. And I will show you how it just briefly. In my case, and this can be the reason why, I have included Microsoft Teams here. I've added some conditions that we should exclude managed devices and compliant devices. so that we shouldn't apply these to devices that we are in control of or that are valid from a security point of view, and only apply that on mobile apps and desktop clients, allowing the browser. So there are a number of policies that we need to combine to enable this workflow. And the value of this is that we can control what we now can do with Teams, and that's what I'll be showing on Ubuntu in just a second. And I will be showing quite a lot of products, solutions, services today. And as Rafael said as well, it's a mess with licensing. I'm one of the very, very few people in the world that actually enjoy talking about Microsoft licensing. I'm a bit odd that way. But for most people, this is a complete mess, and which I fully understand. And since it's always changing, it's really hard to keep up to. This is actually one of my favorite tools in those discussions, created by a Microsoft employee, Aaron Dinich, who regularly updates these. So this is from May 2020, but he just updated this to reflect the recent changes to Microsoft 365 licensing. And you don't need to take screenshots, just scan this. And this is one of my favorite things to do when I'm speaking on a live stage, because it's always fun to just throw up a QR code on a projector and see how many people that, without knowing what's behind this, scans it. Don't do that. Trust your QR codes. In this case, you can trust it because it will point to GitHub, where you will be able to download a variety of PDFs with similar information. So you can see the different add-ons, the different SKUs, the different workloads and such, and find the right license for you. And like I said, Aaron just updated these, so please use that. But you can also use the comparison tool in the new Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So where you go to purchase new licenses, you can actually compare most of the available licenses there to actually see what differs from both a pricing point of view as well as the products inside of them. So that was the threat protection part. But like I said initially, we have other things that we also need to protect. And I know that our colleagues and us as users don't want to feel like this when we are using our personal devices or our managed devices or any device or going to work. We don't want to feel that we have someone watching over our shoulder and that we will be punished if we break any of our compliance regulations. So we are going to talk about data protection and how we can make that as simple as possible and limit mistakes, limit the possibilities to do something that a user didn't intend to do without feeling that they are under constant surveillance. So we will start by using an iPad form, or we will continue with the Linux one actually. So we'll disconnect that and head into my Ubuntu machine. There we go. And this is exactly the environment I wanted you to see on the MacBook. So in this case, I've been blocked from using the Teams client, also on Linux, and using conditional access on Linux. And I'll actually throw that in. I usually save that for other sessions, but we'll throw it in for now. If you want to target specifically Linux with conditional access, that's not possible, since it's not one of the supported platforms. But I have a variety of use cases where I actually need to do that. One of them being thin clients for BYOD as an example. And the best way to target Linux machines with conditional access is to do a very interesting rule. You include any device. And then you exclude all devices, because that will mean that any other operating system than these will be targeted by this rule and nothing else. So if you want to limit the access from your car, from a thin client, from a Linux desktop, that's one way you could do it. It won't work with every control within conditional access, but it will be one option for you to ensure that you have a different set of policies for unsupported devices using conditional access. But here we are. So this is the web client running in Firefox on Ubuntu. And as you have noticed, or may have noticed, we have the URL for Microsoft Cloud App Security up here. And the experience from a Teams perspective is just as we expected it to be. And while the data resides in Microsoft Teams or anywhere across Office 365, we are in control of that data from a compliance point of view, threat protection point of view, and so on. And we may not want this data to end up on an actual unmanaged device. But if I would like to download this, it will block that, and I will be given another file saying that this file was blocked since it contained data that is not allowed to be downloaded. And in my case, I've done this in a very simple way. I'm just blocking all file downloads from Teams on unmanaged devices using Cloud App Security. But you can actually limit this so that you are allowed to download certain kinds of files, certain classifications of files, and disregard everything else. So I'm alerted here, and as you will see in Cloud App Security soon, you will also get an alert from an administrative point of view. So that's one thing, and I'm sure many of you are aware of this, but for you that aren't, this is my other account. And with Cloud App Security, we can actually do some other quite interesting things as well. So for the ones of you that know Swedish, you know that farligt means dangerous. And if I try to send that, that action is blocked. And here in Swedish, it says, don't do that. So with Cloud App Security, we can actually control what happens in terms of communication as well. And that's actually something I've gotten quite a lot of questions about now. How can we ensure that we take care of our employees when they are working from home, when they don't have access to their manager, if they're feeling bullied or harassed or something like that? So we can actually monitor the communication flow within Microsoft Teams. And Microsoft Cloud App Security can be one of those options as well. Another way of protecting our devices, and now I'm going to change to my iPad. And this is one of the oldest demos I've done, but it's still, in my opinion, not used widely enough. So I'm now connecting my unmanaged iPad to my machine, and I will send my test account, hopefully. Oops. I lost that. A Teams notification. Because it still strikes me. I don't know how it is with your organization, but I at one point implemented quite a lot of Surface Hubs around the Nordics especially. And I was surprised to see how few organizations that actually locked down that interface. Because I at one point walked into a conference room where my manager at that point were supposed to have a meeting. And I could see on the Surface Hub that this person is going to have a job interview with this person who happened to be one of our primary competitors. So you need to be really careful on what you're showing, and the same thing applies to notifications, of course. So hang on, and I'll send a message to this device. Come on. And I saw that someone asked about how quick you can change tenants now. And I just changed my tenant. So I'm now sending a message. And as you can see here, I only get the notification, you have a new message in Teams. The normal circumstance would be that I saw that message. And as you can see here, my app is also protected. So when I try to access the actual app, this has nothing to do with conditional access at this point. This is me accessing the app. I'm forced to enter another PIN code. And now I'm here and you can see the notification and this says secret in Swedish. So I have protected my notification. I have protected the access to this app on this unmanaged iPad. And as you may be aware of with app protection policies, come on. If I try to copy anything outside and send to my former colleague, your organizational data can't be pasted here. So that's also one way we can protect our mobile devices and the apps, the data, the access to our internal environment using Microsoft Teams on our mobile devices that are unmanaged. And this is something I encourage you to implement, because what we see now, like I said, I work for a company that does penetration testing and such, and we are getting more and more questions about how can you access our environment from our iPads, from our Android devices, since that is now one way into many organizations. The mobile devices are something you should protect, and the access to data within the apps on your mobile device is something you should be protecting. And my last demo for today is from our Windows machine here. And this is when I started off working with Windows 10, and that's now 5 years ago. Time flies. This was actually one of the features I thought would be one of the hero features. This feature would enable every single organization to accelerate Windows 10 adoption, because it's a brilliant feature. If we take a look inside of our task manager, we have something called enterprise context over here. And as you can see, we have personal, we have exempt, and we have my domain. And as you can see, Teams is protected or is in the enterprise context of my domain. We can also see that if we view this small briefcase up here, and even if we go to a web client, we can see the same briefcase up here. And if you are implementing this feature, which is Windows Information Protection, do remember to include your MCAS URLs in this as well, since it looks at the URL, and this is not the regular teams.microsoft.com URL. So include the Teams Microsoft.com EU2 or whatever data center you end up in your URL list. And what will this enable us to do then? Well, so for now, I'll remove that one. So you see that I'm not cheating. And here I have another download. So I will download that from Teams. From the correct path, that was the online one. Download. That's now downloading from my Teams client, and it ends up here. And as you can see, I have this small briefcase here, since this file was downloaded from an enterprise context store. And this now means that I can set policies on this. And again, I'm using a local user account on this machine, has nothing to do with my Azure AD. The only thing I've done is registered my account to this device. So I get single sign-on and such to it, but I have no insight into it. I have no management of it, and this is still applied. And what can I do now? Yeah, since we have this one protected by policies, here, this is my OneDrive for Business, and this is my OneDrive, my consumer OneDrive. And if I put this one over here, and I'll open up another downloads folder and try to drag this file to my personal OneDrive, I'm not allowed to do that. But I can take the exact same file and put it into my OneDrive for Business. That will work just fine. So in this way, I'm able, by combining Microsoft Cloud App Security, Windows Information Protection, Teams features, and conditional access, to ensure that I could allow my users, my colleagues, to download data on their personal device, and I would still be able to control what happens to that data, protecting it from leaking to untrusted cloud resources, or even to be stored on USB drives or something like that. So to summarize, and I'm happy to take your questions when I've summarized this session, please feel free to write them in the chat, and Peter will raise them to me later on, and I will reply to as many as I can. First and foremost, look at your strategy. How do you plan to enable working from home? What resources do you have access to? What's your budget? Do you need to provide your users with a managed device, or could you allow them to use any device of their choice? Find that strategy, and then find the strategy that suits your organization, the workloads you have. But Teams is one of the first workloads I see being used in such a broad way and on any device, and that's the brilliance of Teams, of course. So find your strategy that you can stick to, find your strategy for bring your own device, and decide how you should manage them. Then you do the design, and the design matters because you can say use any bring your own device, and that will be a challenge from a design perspective, but it will also enable your users to work on their preferred device, and that may even in the long run be a benefit to you. So design from a security, compliance, and user satisfaction point of view, because users don't want you to mess with their data. Users don't want you to look into what they are doing on their private devices. Users don't want you to decide on what they purchase with their own money, potentially. So user satisfaction, security, and compliance can be combined, and that's using the power of Teams and the power of Microsoft 365. And do consider that protection. Like I said, we have seen so many security challenges with a variety of tools, not just Teams, any tool, where we see attacks coming from unmanaged devices, managed devices, through channels and the tools we trust. Because sometimes it's really, really hard to figure that out. But do consider that threats can come from anywhere, and you need to ensure that only the data you want to export from your tenant or get out from your tenant, as well as the data you get into your tenant, is the data you want and data you can control and potentially protect or protect yourself against. But see this as a session to inspire you, that even if you can't manage those devices, you can still protect them. And that's the brilliance of Microsoft Teams. And I'm now happy to take any questions. And if you want to reach out to me after this session, or just listen to possibly one of the best Swedish tech podcasts with 3 people living in the 4th largest city region in Sweden, please feel free to tune in. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's head back to the questions.